Why is The Last of Us 2 getting so much hate? Spoiler, kind of. It's like watching Star Wars 1 through 6. You grew to love Luke, Leia, and Han, and you think Star Wars is the best series ever. Then, the next movie, you see Leia divorce Han because she's actually homosexual. She wants to raise her own son Ben with her now female lover. You don't know what's the point of that in the Star Wars universe, but whatever. And then, all three main characters got killed by this random no-name guy called Bob Smith. Now all of Luke, Leia, and Han are combat veterans and have fought against 20 or even 40 enemies versus one and have survived. They're tough to kill, right? Nope. In the new movie, Bob Smith kills them easily by using his Mary Sue abilities. Why did Bob hate them? Because Bob's parents were working on the Death Star when it blew up. Yes, that's the same Death Star that killed billions, and Bob's parents were part of that mass murdering crowd. Now Bob Smith takes over as the main character, and you're supposed to love him as he hunts down all of Luke, Leia, and Han. And the new story is written in a way that, with their deaths, the whole story arc in movies 1 through 6 becomes meaningless. You could literally skip all the movies 1 through 6 and jump straight into Bob Smith. Whatever happened with the Force, or whatever character development, or any story in movies 1 through 6 was a total waste of your time. The whole story is now about Bob Smith. Now, if you managed to not blow your brains out during that dumpster fire of a review, I'm proud of you. For those of you who did, well, at least my video's still playing. The sentiment and tone in that guy's review encapsulates how a large portion of The Last of Us 2 community feels. And it's honestly a little heartbreaking. The Last of Us 2 is an incredible game that is just as good, if not better, than the first game. I'm sure you picked up on a few things on that review I read. A big focus of that review was anti-feminist sentiment and focusing on characters' sexuality. See, about 4 months before the game's launch, the game's entire plot was leaked online and made the neckbeards lose their shit. Here's a spoiler warning, by the way. We're going to be discussing the entirety of The Last of Us Part 2 in this video, so here's your spoiler warning. We're jumping right in. From the leaked plot, there were a few different things that were the focus of the controversy. First, LGBTQ characters. Second, a woman kills Joel 2 hours into the game. And third, a lot of people claimed that the game shit on the legacy of the first game. The hate train that rammed into The Last of Us Part 2 ruined the game for many prematurely. Just look at the Metacritic score versus the audience score. We're going to address as much criticism I could find about The Last of Us Part 2 in this video, and to start, we need to start with all the criticism that came along with the leaks. The biggest was the claim that the game had gone woke. Listen up loud and clear. Being gay is not political, being a woman is not political, and being not white is not political. Having LGBTQ characters, female characters, and non-white characters does not make a game woke. Unfortunately, you shitheads I'm trying to reach with this video are going to majorly disagree with that, so let's talk about it a little bit more. The Don't Say Gay bill was passed in Florida earlier this year, and it caused quite the news cycle. Righties claimed that it was to protect kids from woke indoctrination, and the left claimed it was an effort to erase gay people. Essentially, the bill made it so Florida teachers cannot mention anything LGBTQ related in the classroom. Meaning, if a teacher is, let's say, gay, she couldn't mention her wife in the classroom. It's things like these that actually cause a lot of damage to LGBTQ people. It makes them political. Now, LGBTQ teachers in Florida have to tiptoe around every little detail they share about their personal life in fear of not violating this law. A straight teacher can mention his wife, no issue, but under this new law, a gay teacher would have to avoid all stories involving her wife or risk losing her job. People on the right like to paint it that gay teachers were having a cock-sucking class every 4th period, when the reality is nothing of the sort. But the reality of the situation is, a bill like this just makes gay teachers feel less than and perpetuates anti-gay hate in the culture war. Reason why I brought this up is to show you that even today, the concept that gay people are political is alive and well. I'll be honest, if you don't believe that a gay person is born gay, then I can't help you. If you think it's a choice, or they're possessed by demons, or some dumb shit like that, I cannot help you. You're too far right for me to bother saving in this video. But for those of you who aren't dumb and understand that LGBTQ people are born that way, Let's do a little bit of thinking. Gay and straight people are both born that way. So why is it political for a gay teacher to say my husband, but not political for a straight teacher to say my wife? Well, the answer is simply it's not any different. Not in the slightest. So in turn, The Last of Us Part 2 having 3 LGBTQ characters out of a large cast of characters, is that political? Not in the slightest. First off, Ellie was confirmed to be lesbian in the first game. It's always been a part of her character and a theme in The Last of Us. Bill is also gay in Part 1. It is nothing new here in Part 2. It's like people knew she was gay in Part 1 and then were shocked to find out she would be dating a woman when the leaks came out. It's honestly so fucking stupid. The LGBTQ character that gets the most hate and is called political the most is my man Lev. Lev is a character who escapes a cult in Seattle and becomes Abby's companion during large portions of the game. I'll talk about them both later in more detail, but all you need to know for now is that Lev is transgender. He was born female into this extreme cult, and so when he shaves his head to match his identity, he gets kicked out, exiled, and hunted. Many claim that he's a political insert, but it is far from that. There are only about 4 or 5 lines that address Lev and his identity. It's not put on a stick and shoved in your face or anything like that. It's simply an aspect of Lev's character. Because just like gay people, transgender people are born that way. Even in an apocalyptic society like this, someone who is transgender would still want to identify with their chosen gender and still want to be treated that way. Transgender people have existed all throughout time and society. They haven't been treated great, but they've always been there because, again, they are born that way. It's not political to make Lev trans, it's just the statistical inevitability. A similar argument applies for the female characters. Redditors, I know this is shocking, but women are real and they would still exist in the Last of Us universe. Let's move on from this point. It's pretty ridiculous. I think you got what I was trying to say. Now, in order to gather as many criticisms for The Last of Us Part 2 as I could, I opened a new incognito window, went to YouTube, and searched Last of Us Part 2 bad. Wowee! I was surprised that 90% of the videos critical of The Last of Us Part 2 were complete misreads, bad faith interpretations, or obvious money-making scams. I watched 4 creators: Zaid Magenta, Griffin Gaming, the Piss Boy himself, The Quartering, and some ordinary gamers. Zaid Magenta and Griffin Gaming I had never heard of before, and their Last of Us 2 videos were my first introductions to their content. I was very disappointed to discover that both channels were exactly what you think they'd be. Each channel just drips with that right-wing grifter culture war energy. Both use tons of loaded language when referring to the game, using words like white knighting, woke, and every other buzzword in the book. Griffin Gaming straight up admitted in every video I watched of his that these Last of Us 2 hate videos are a major cash cow for him. Cool, get the bag, I guess. I would be lying if I said I didn't hope to make money on my videos myself one day, but the way he says it is such a red flag. He openly admits that he's going to milk every piece of hate he can find about this game for money. That is a clear sign that his content is insanely biased. He might actually genuinely dislike The Last of Us Part 2. I'm more than willing to believe that. The issue is that he's making so much money off of perpetuating this hate train that he has no real reason to give the game an honest look and change his opinions. It's fine to do commentary and make money off of commentary, but it's another thing when that creator is so upfront that they're a fucking grifter. Also, his commentary was dog shit. I'm not going to do a point-by-point breakdown or anything like this. God knows the video is going to be long enough. But the thing is, with all the videos I watched, he never really said anything that wasn't surface level, and he repeated himself endlessly. The other creator, Zaid Magenta, was even more frustrating though. He never played the game. Openly admits to that, and says he's seen the cutscenes and thinks that that's enough to make an opinion on the game, and it's not! So much of the character energy and character development comes through playing the game. The first game was the same. In many little moments, you can trigger interactions with the characters that really helped you connect with all of them. The game is like 25 hours long, and only seeing the 2 to 3 hours of cutscenes is definitely not enough to critique The Last of Us Part 2. On top of that, this creator was either dumb as shit or dishonest as hell. From the content I saw, I'm going with dishonest. Pretty much every example he pulled up was just the most dishonest interpretation you could possibly have. This is the energy that filled a large portion of the Last of Us fan base after the leaks came out and even after the game's launch. The videos spread by these creators and the piss boy himself, the quartering, really damaged this game for a lot of people. While 80% of the critics were blinded by the hate I discussed before, there was a small percentage of the game's critics that didn't hate it for LGBTQ characters or female leads. They had actual issues with the game. I was really glad to see that when I went back and watched my man Some Ordinary Gamers videos on The Last of Us Part 2, he fell in this small category of critics. He makes it clear that he does not care about any of the LGBTQ characters or the fact that Ellie and Abby are both female. His issues lie with the game disrespecting Joel and some other more nuanced issues. I do still think Mudahar and others like him are still blinded by a lot of the hate that came out regarding the leaks and with Naughty Dog taking down critical videos and things like that. In watching all of this content and reading a bunch of the reviews, I think I've come away with a pretty good list of some of the major criticisms people have with The Last of Us Part 2. With the types of critics ranging from a right-wing reactionary dork all the way to a legitimately disappointed fan, I thought it would be best to rank all of these criticisms on a tier list. We will chronologically go through the game, and as we do, we'll address many of the criticisms levied at The Last of Us Part 2. Then, we'll rank them on this tier list depending on how legitimate or honest I feel the criticisms are. So let's start with the one that we addressed already. The idea that gay, female, and non-white characters are political. This goes in D tier. We already addressed the meat of this, but in short, if you think being gay, being not a man, and being non-white is political, then you really need to re-examine your thinking and maybe spend some time in the real world. Another thing that upset fans were the deceptive trailers. Some of the trailers made it look like Joel would be the main character again, or at least a major character in the game. I think if the game was about Ellie dealing with the loss of Joel, that should have been presented a little bit more honestly in the trailers. I can understand why fans would be frustrated with this dishonesty once the leaks came out. The trailers made it seem like Joel would be a main feature of the game, and then the leaks came out and we found out he would be dying 2 hours in. I can see why that would upset some fans. I'm willing to put this criticism in B tier. I think it's a genuine enough criticism, however, to be clear, it has no impact on the game today. We're so far removed at this point from any of the game's promotional material that its effect and dishonesty really shouldn't affect the way you feel about this game anymore. Moving on from the leaks and trailers, let's talk about the opening of the game. The Last of Us Part 2's opening is vastly different from the opening of Part 1. Part 1 opens and immediately starts with the outbreak and the action. Part 2, on the other hand, is a much slower burn. In fact, Part 2 as a whole is a far slower burn than Part 1. Some don't love the pacing, but we'll talk about that later. Part 2 starts back in Jackson once Ellie and Joel get back from Salt Lake City after the events of the first game. Tommy and Joel go out on a ride and Joel tells Tommy the truth about what happened in Salt Lake. Keep in mind, y'all, Joel slaughtered dozens at the end of Last of Us 1 in order to save Ellie. A lot of the reviews I read for Part 2 like to paint the ending of Part 1 like Joel just shot Marlene, when in fact he killed dozens, including doctors and nurses. The ending of Part 1 isn't powerful just because Joel fights to save Ellie. A big part of it is what Joel does to save Ellie. Tommy is willing to accept what Joel's done and the pair ride back to Jackson. The tone here, while much less intense than the first game's opening, is still masterful. We're thrown right back into that somber, quiet tone. Things are peaceful, but with a slight pressure just under the surface. The energy between Joel and Ellie right after is really well done as well. It's such a fucking awkward scene. The pair has only been in Jackson for a week or two, and it hasn't been more than a month since the finale of the first game. Ellie continues to be suspicious of Joel, so there is tension between them that comes out in their interactions. It makes sense. Say what you want, but Joel's lie at the end of Part 1 is not super convincing. During their conversation, the relationship we grew to love in part 1 comes out again. Joel shows off a guitar he found and even promises to teach Ellie. After Joel gives Ellie the guitar, we cut to a few years in the future where the game takes place. Ellie is about 19 at this point, and it's been 4 years since the events of the first game. The game does something that I really like when it comes to media. It just throws you in. In a way, all media has to do this, but what I mean is in the game, it doesn't take the time to explain everything to you right away. In part 1, we're first introduced to the infection, then the modern ruined world, then Joel and Tess, then Ellie, and so on and so on. Point is that everything is slowly introduced to you. New characters are associated mainly with just their specific area and are only introduced and expanded upon in that section with the exception of Joel and Ellie. Part 2 is different in the sense that we meet all the new characters right from the start with little explanation. We quickly meet Jesse and Dina and are just thrown right into their dynamics with Ellie. All three reference some event that took place the night before, and we don't get to see that event until much later in the game. You have to piece it together through context of the world and conversations around you. I really like Brandon Sanderson, and specifically his series The Stormlight Archive. It's a series of novels that takes place in this really incredible world with a very unique magic system. There's a lot to learn about this world and each of its characters. Instead of linearly introducing you piece by piece, the book just moves forward and you figure out a lot of the world through context clues. You do get explicit explanations on a lot of things eventually, but it might not be until page 800 where a character explicitly explains a concept about the world. I had to do that line so many goddamn times because of all the E's in it. Anyway, Last of Us 2 is the same kind of storytelling. We meet all of the new Jackson characters and Abby and her entire crew with little to no exploration of them right at the start. I love this type of storytelling. It really makes you engage with the story and pay attention. We might have no clue who Abby and the crew is at first, but as we engage with the story, we slowly pick up on context clues. First, we figure out that they're looking for someone. Then we eventually learn through a conversation between Abby and Owen that they're out there looking for Joel, but they never say why. Then, using further context clues, it's pretty easy to make the link to the Fireflies and the events of the first game. This all builds over the 2-hour opening to the climactic ending with Joel's brutal death. Instead of just having a conversation among Abby and her friends at the start that clearly sets up their goals and intentions, the game makes you wonder and think about things as it slowly drips you with more information. The same is true with the Jackson crew and their relationships. Instead of outright showing us the drama that took place the night before, the game has us figure it out through Ellie and Jesse's interactions, Ellie's interactions with the old fart, and Ellie and Dina's conversations. The game is quicker to give you information here, but it still takes its time and really immerses you into the town of Jackson while you explore and speak to the various characters. I understand that some would have preferred a more direct storytelling approach, but I personally love this type of storytelling and world introduction. It minimizes exposition and maximizes story immersion. If you went into this game hot-headed and angry about it, you probably missed a lot in this opening section. With the horrible reputation the game was dishonestly given due to a lot of the leaks, a lot of people found this section boring and slow. It might be slow, but it's by no means boring. If you give the characters a chance and remove the already negative expectation that a lot of people had going in, it really is a different experience. One thing people didn't like about the opening of the game that we mostly already addressed is the slow pacing. Even with the less direct storytelling approach aside, the game as a whole is slowly paced. Slow pacing isn't for everyone, but I personally really love it when it's done right. We mostly discussed this already, but the newest Batman film is a great example of this. The Batman's slower pacing was a big thing that critics of the film would bring up. It is a 3-hour movie after all. But I really love the slower pacing of the film. It gives a really menacing undertone to a ton of different scenes that just wouldn't be possible if it was paced like a Marvel movie. Of course, slow pacing can be overdone. Snyder Cut! Sorry, something got that in my throat there. I think Better Call Saul is another fantastic example of great slow pacing in media. There are so many scenes of a character just doing something, but they're all so cinematic and add so much to the viewing experience. All that being said, while I really like slow pacing, it's valid if you just don't like slow-paced media. It really is just a preference thing. There is plenty of faster-paced media that is just as good as the things I've listed here. So if you don't like The Last of Us 2 because it's slower paced, then that's pretty valid. There's not much I can do to change your mind because that is just personal preference. I'm putting this criticism in B tier. I don't think disliking the pacing affects the overall quality of the media because slow-paced media simply isn't for everyone. This criticism can be made in decently good faith and isn't an instant red flag to me. Someone who dislikes the game for this reason is someone I can at least have a conversation with. After the introduction to Jackson, you go out on patrol with Dina and end up stumbling upon a weed farm. It's not that simple. While out on patrol, a big storm hits and Ellie and Dina take cover in some nearby shelter. The whole section up to that point had the pair occasionally speaking about an older man who Dina used to run this route with. They also talk about weed if you manage to find Dina's bong in another area. The pair even comments that the older guy always had some weed on him, so it's not like it's just magic weed that's there. It's been set up and honestly makes sense in this world. Jackson has power and generators and fuel. It'd be pretty reasonable to have a little grow farm like this. Also, no cops. ACAB. People for some reason don't like the implied sex scene and the pair smoking a joint while waiting out the storm. Also, they only take 2 hits off the joint and it's a really big waste of weed. I really don't understand the criticism. Like, come on, even you Redditors should like this. It's a lesbian sex scene and weed. This was by no means a major issue people had with the game. Most of the people who had an issue with this fit well under the gay is political category that we already talked about, so we won't separately rank this. Meanwhile, during the same storm, Abby and her crew are holed up in a big old house when Owen finds Jackson. He goes and grabs Abby and shows her the town. Owen thinks most of the crew will want to turn around once they see how big the town is. It would be very hard to find Joel and get to him safely. Abby's pretty upset about the facts and decides to go off on her own to try to find Joel or at least some more information to make the group stay. She runs off on her own during the start of the storm. Oh, there's also an infected horde that she's running from. Some who've never actually played the game say, wow, an infected horde, how convenient. And this is pretty 2 IQ and a clear indication that they didn't play the game. We won't be ranking this criticism because it's not levied very often, but I've heard it once or twice. To address the claim, it's stated in many flashbacks that hordes go through Jackson every winter. This is an active and reoccurring threat that the people in Jackson are aware of. It's part of the reason why they do their patrols. Winter in Wyoming is at least 4 months of the year, so assuming that only one horde goes through the area a month, that's still something that happens 4 times a year. It wasn't just a 1% super rare thing that just happened to occur this day, but rather a constant reoccurring threat that the people of Jackson are aware of. Moving on, this is where Abby runs into Joel and Tommy and where our next actual big piece of criticism lies. Joel's mistake. When Abby, Joel, and Tommy meet, they are currently all being rushed by a swarm of infected. Joel and Tommy just met this lone survivor and ask her for her name. She freely gives it to them, so they give her theirs, and then they work together to fight through the infected horde. A major point of criticism that this game gets is a lot of people say Joel wouldn't have just given out his name like this. There's a second part to Joel's mistake that we'll talk about shortly that I think is a better footing as an argument, but I heavily disagree with this first part of the criticism. Joel is a hardened survivor, yes, but he wouldn't be constantly keeping his name personal. He's crossed many people in the past, more than just Fireflies. It's been years since Joel's crossed anyone, and while he is very aware that someone could come for him, he's not expecting this lone girl they meet to be hunting him. We learn through conversations throughout the game that many survivors pass through Jackson. They also deal with bandits and the infected, and that's really it. Even assuming that Abby is a hostile, Joel and Tommy would assume that she's at most a bandit and not an actual soldier hunting them. The pair giving their names in this situation makes complete sense. After fighting through some parts of the infected, they make it back to Joel and Tommy's hideout, but that place doesn't hold out for long. Abby suggests her place where she and her friends are at, and Joel and Tommy accept. Again, the same arguments with the names apply here. Worst case scenario, they're expecting bandits. They're currently being swarmed with infected and don't really have any other options. Also, Abby has actively been helping the pair escape the horde, so some trust is formed between them, even if it's small. Now, the third piece of this criticism I think is the best argument for it, but I still find it weak. Once they make it to the house Abby's friends are at and are safe from the infected, Joel and Tommy go inside. This is what people say Joel's biggest and least characteristic mistake is. The claim, like with the other situations, is Joel just wouldn't let his guard down and go inside like that. Come on though, again, it's been 4 years. Joel's been in Jackson for 4 years, and life here is far easier. Besides some occasional bandits and the infected, they mostly just deal with other survivors. On top of that, Joel and Tommy trust Abby a little bit at this point. She just helped them fight for their lives. None of Abby's friends are aware of who Tom and Jolie are when they ride in. They see the pair helping Abby, and so in turn are instantly friendly towards them when they first meet them. I know haters of the game like to paint Abby's friends like they're all horrible characters, but in fact they actually have depth to them. On a first encounter with a survivor, these people are friendly. They help get them inside and out of the storm and even start to help care for their horses. Every indication is telling Tommy and Joel that this is a group of survivors. Tommy shows this when he invites the group back to Jackson to restock once the storm clears up. Speaking of Jackson really quick, it's a commune, right? There is definitely no money in this world, and everyone in Jackson seems really free and giving with resources. I'm sure trading takes place between the people of Jackson and other survivors, but Jackson as a whole, I'm 95% sure, is just a commune. Anyway, you can seethe and cope and claim that Joel wouldn't have given out his name, he wouldn't have followed Abby to that house, or that he wouldn't have gone inside that house all you want, but when you actually examine the heat of the situation and the impressions given off by the group and Abby, it makes much more sense that Joel did go inside. I'm putting this criticism in C tier. I can see how you could think this in good faith, but when you actually spend 2 seconds and think about the past and the things that have been going on, it makes sense for Joel's character. So Joel's death. To be honest, a lot of the major criticisms are pretty front-loaded in this game's opening, mainly due to Joel. There are a few different issues people had with Joel's death. First off, apparently it's rushed. The beating Joel takes is another piece of criticism people have in regards to Joel's death, and it kind of contradicts the first point. Joel's tortured for quite some time before getting hit with the final blow, so it's really not rushed. People also complain about the long opening of the game. This also contradicts the claim that Joel's death is rushed. The point of this whole introduction is to lead up to Joel's death. We've been getting clues throughout the first hour and then straight confirmation that Abby's after Joel in the second hour. The game has clearly been building to this. Even without hearing any of the leaks, it would have been obvious that Joel might die very soon. The only reasonable interpretation of it's rushed I can find is the fact that Joel dies within the second hour of the game. But that's pretty stupid. The game's about Ellie dealing with the loss of Joel. In order to start that game's story, Joel's brains need to be on the floor. The second piece of criticism, and probably the bigger of the two, is the fact that Joel's death is pretty disrespectful. And you know what? It sure is. That's the whole point of Joel's death. Joel's crossed many, many people over the years, and he legitimately isn't sure who's attacking him when he first gets his knee shot off. He does figure it out, but it really could have been a few different groups of people. Joel's fallen into safety here in Jackson, but he still knew his day was coming. Joel's death was not a surprise for him. Again, may I remind you that Joel slaughtered dozens of soldiers, nurses, and doctors to save Ellie. The rage that these Fireflies have against Joel makes perfect sense, and in turn, so does the beating that he receives. Joel would have done this or worse to anyone who killed Ellie. I mean, he did in the first game, right? This is a world of anarchy, and people have become much harder and much more brutal as a result. Joel's death being so brutal not only makes sense in the world, but it also makes sense for the story. I promise you, Naughty Dog planned every emotion you feel throughout this story. They knew that Joel's death would make people so fucking mad because it's such a brutal scene, and it does absolutely disrespect Joel. They wanted to make your blood boil while watching this scene. It's really well done in my opinion. There's also a vast range of emotions shown off by all the people hunting Joel. You have Abby, of course, who is filled with hate and rage. Then you have characters like Owen, who support killing Joel but argue to keep Ellie and Tommy alive because they're not associated with this. And on the far end, you have characters like Mel, who are just unsettled by the entire thing. It is such a storm of emotions when you get to this scene, and I wouldn't change a thing. One last thing I hear all the fucking time is, they could have killed Joel like this. Yeah, they could have killed Joel in 1.5 million ways, but they didn't. This argument is just a moot point, really. I understand the sentiment behind it. Most people were expecting Joel to die, just not in such a brutal manner and at the start of the game. I bet most people saw Joel dying in the sequel near the end of the game in some heroic action to save someone or to save Ellie. So when they get the exact opposite of that in a very brutal scene that is actually the catalyst for the game's story instead of the finale, I can see why they'd be upset. So well, yes, an incredible game could have been crafted around Joel and Ellie again, with Joel dying at the end, but it wasn't. Move past your preconceptions of what you wanted the game to be and give the game we got an actual look. Overall, I'm putting the criticisms surrounding Joel's death in C tier. I can see how someone could legitimately be frustrated by Joel's death. The issue is, all of the arguments that fuel this are wrong, incorrect, and caused many to just absolutely hate the game. Moving past Joel's death, the final part of the opening consists of Ellie trying to get people to go after Joel's killers. They were able to get the group's name of WLF and learn that it stands for Washington Liberation Front, so they at least know where to go to start looking. Tommy is against it at first. While he really wants to get the people who killed his brother, he's willing to let them go for the sake of his marriage and for the sake of Jackson. In order to safely go after that group, they would need a large group themselves, and they just can't sacrifice that kind of manpower. Ellie is very upset by this and makes it clear that she's going after them herself, even if no one helps. Tommy knows Ellie isn't bluffing, so Tommy locks down the stables so Ellie can't leave and then heads out himself in Ellie's place to find the killers. Maria, Tommy's wife, wants his ass home safe, so she lets Ellie and Dina go after him in order to help get him home safe. Honestly, this whole final part is so fucking sad. The tone, like normal, is expert here. The entire town seems heartbroken with Joel's death. Dina especially seems to speak to Ellie with a little bit of space between them for a bit. It's really fucking sad when you go to Joel's house and it's covered in cards and gifts from the grieving townsfolk. Joel had become a very important member of the community in his 4 years there, and while the loss is definitely the biggest for Ellie, the entire town is mourning for Joel. This tone carries through all 3 of Ellie's days in Seattle. The somber tone and impact from Joel's death continues to be present. While the opening of The Last of Us Part 2 is filled with controversy, I wouldn't change a thing about it. I think I've adequately addressed the majority of the criticisms levied at this game's opening. You might disagree with my reasons, but man, if that's the case, you're blind. The opening is this incredible slow burn that immerses you in the world and the emotions of the characters. Even if you don't like Joel's death for whatever reason, you most definitely felt the anger and frustration that came with the scene. I think that's something that for some reason a lot of people just didn't get about The Last of Us Part 2. A good piece of media is gonna make you feel, right? That's one of the reasons why Joel's death is as brutal and visceral as it is. We'll talk about this more when we get there, but playing as Abby in The Last of Us Part 2 after this was infuriating. I hated it at first, and then it later became one of my favorite aspects about The Last of Us Part 2. Joel's death is similar. It does an incredible job of making you as the player feel. I hate to break it to you, but The Last of Us Part 2 won against most of you Reddit neckbeards. The point of that scene was to induce hate into the player for Abby and her friends, to help drive the player and Ellie into wanting to hunt them down. The Last of Us Part 2's opening succeeds in giving the player exactly what it wants them to feel. Moving on from the opening, let's cut to Seattle Day 1 and discuss the actual story of the game and not just the opening. Seattle Day 1, and of course the entire game, showcases one uncontroversial fact. This game is gorgeous. Every part of this game is so sexy. I'll bring this up from time to time, but it goes to say that the entire game is visually stunning. Once reaching the quarantine zone for Seattle, we're introduced to some of the first puzzles in the game. Overall, puzzles are much better in The Last of Us Part 2. In Part 1, the puzzles were interesting and fun in my opinion. Even on a second playthrough, I knew where most of the solutions to the puzzles were, but I still had fun doing them, and they have unique solutions. That being said, a lot of the time, stuff is pretty obvious. With some exceptions, most of the puzzles in Part 1 can be solved fairly quickly. Another very notable thing about Part 1 is the use of its color yellow. Yellow is used to help grab the eye of the player and guide them to the solution in Part 1. It's good game design and helps the player understand where they need to go, but it did make the puzzles quite easy at times. Essentially, in Part 1, when faced with the puzzle, you scan the area till you find the yellow platform you need to get to, then figure out how to get there. In Part 2, there is no obvious yellow anymore. Instead, they use other methods of game design like level design and lighting to guide the player in Part 2, and it makes the puzzles much better. Not only is the game's immersion better without the constant clear guiding yellow, but the puzzles take more time to figure out. Instead of just finding the yellow, you actually have to scan the area and explore in order to figure out how to get where you want to go. Once you complete these early puzzles, Seattle Day 1 really begins. By the way, for those of you who don't know, The Last of Us Part 2 is structured in 2 3-day chunks. First, you play through the 3 days as Ellie in Seattle, then you play through the same 3 days from Abby's perspective, all leading to a finale that takes place in California. Seattle Day 1 is notable gameplay-wise due to the mini open world section. Ellie and Dina are blocked by a gate and you need to find gas to get it open. You get to ride around in the ruined city and explore as much or as little as you want. While looking for the gas, you find clues and notes that can lead to other optional locations, like the bank. I personally explored everywhere I could, but it's ultimately up to you. You figure out the 2 possible gas locations pretty quickly, so it's just a matter of exploring those locations and moving on if you so choose. One major thing about this section is Dina and Ellie. This section is a major example of if you didn't actually engage with or play the game, you're going to miss a lot. The pair has a ton of interactions here and it does a great job of actually introducing you to their relationship and their dynamic. Some say that the pair does not have chemistry, and we will rank this, just not yet. Point of bringing it up here is because this section shows off that the pair does have chemistry. All the interactions in this area help in this way, but my favorite are the interactions that take place in the synagogue. Dina is Jewish and her family actually still worshipped even with the infection. They weren't fanatics or anything like that, but it was still something that Dina found peace in at times. She also shares that she takes major pride in her ancestry. She comes from a legacy of survivors and she will keep that legacy going. It's really fitting with the pregnancy that we learn about later in the story. This moment between Dina and Ellie is really intimate in a special way. It's not sexual by any means at all, but it's clear that Dina is opening herself up here and really sharing something personal with Ellie. You have to go to the synagogue in order to progress the game, but you do have to trigger the dialogue with Dina through exploring the building. So this moment is missable if you're just trying to get through the game like a lot of people were. Another intimate moment between the pair is when Ellie finds a guitar in the music shop. While exploring, you can find a guitar, and if you choose to, Ellie will sit down and play Dina Take On Me. It's really heartwarming to just watch Dina be amazed by Ellie in this moment.
Talking away, I don't know what I'm to say.
They reminisce together on a moment they shared together before they kissed, and then they move on. It really is just a moment, but it's sweet. Once gassed up and past the aptly named Fuck Fedra gate, your horse blows up. Dina manages to run off, but Ellie is captured. She's interrogated, and then the order to kill her is given when Dina pops in and helps a homie out. This is also the first death of someone involved with Joel's death. The guy interrogating Ellie was in Jackson, and Ellie knifed him back there. He's dead now though. Moving forward, the WLF, or the Washington Liberation Front, or the Wolves, know about Dina and Ellie and are hunting them. Ellie gets a lead on a possible location of a target and they make their way to the TV station. Throughout Seattle Day 1, we've been getting trickles of more information just like the opening of the game. We start to see paintings of some woman saying she'll guide us, and then some even stranger symbols that look like a sideways eye. One element that really helps with this slow trickle of information type of storytelling are the collectibles. Through those collectibles, you can learn that those symbols are from a group called the Scars. Finally, near the end of Day 1, we see what the Scars can do. The TV station was already hit by the Scars and they brutalized the wolves who were there. It's clear that this group is a major threat to be aware of. The Wolves send a support team to the TV station and they find Ellie and Dina there. While running away, we get this really great encounter in the subway. We'll discuss the encounter design and their qualities later, but I would like to talk about this encounter in particular. A few times in part 2, you'll be faced with these encounters that consist of infected and humans. I love these encounters. They're so hectic and stressful in a lot of unique ways. Also, this encounter is visually really cool. The intense red lighting really adds a lot to the feeling of this encounter. Additionally, we're introduced to a new type of infected here, the Shambler. I like how they slowly tease you with this beast of an infected. First, you just hear the monster kill a WLF soldier. Then, you find one of the burnt soldiers' bodies, until finally, you crawl over a Shambler as it ravages a soldier. Then, you get to fight them. These monstrosities are brutal in encounters. They kill you fast and need to be a priority target, or you have to get away. They also explode when killed. Great. All being said, these are a great addition to the possible types of infected to face. They really ramp up the intensity of every encounter they're placed in. Just seeing them would make me stressed about an encounter, and that's exactly what you want from an enemy in a survival horror game. Once escaping from that infected subway, the pair finds an old theater to hunker down in. Dina has been getting sick throughout the day, and finally she collapses and tells Ellie that she thinks she might be pregnant. Ellie is pretty mean to her and does not apologize once she realizes that.
Didn't know. I wasn't sure, okay? I didn't want to be a burden.
Well, you're a burden now, aren't you?
Kinda like Joel in part 1. I do see parts of Joel in Ellie, especially this time around because I had legitimately just finished playing part 1 a few days prior. In case you didn't know, I made a video on part 1 that I put out before this one, so go watch that. That's why I played these games so close together, was to make these videos. In doing so, I saw a ton of Joel's qualities in Ellie in The Last of Us Part 2. In part 1, Joel was always slow to apologize and many times just wouldn't. He'd make it up in other ways. Like after he breaks Ellie's heart in part 1, he doesn't apologize. Instead, he does a big gesture by having Ellie hop on his horse right as they get back to Jackson so the pair can head out and continue on their journey together. It's little qualities like this that we see in Ellie that make it clear that Joel really did have a major influence on her. Speaking of Ellie and her own qualities, this is one criticism I saw from time to time. Ellie's changed. The argument is that Ellie is far colder and far different from the Ellie we once knew. First, she isn't. Even a few years later, Ellie still talks about astronomy, makes dumb jokes, and she still collects superhero stuff. She's different in some ways, sure, but most of these changes are natural changes we go through as we grow up. Ellie is no longer 14. This game is 4 years later. And Ellie's not nearly as rambunctious, but otherwise, it's still the same Ellie. Look at the changes you personally went through from 14 to 19. You change a lot. The core of who you are stays, but your priorities and focuses in life change. Your confidence grows and you gain a much larger desire to be independent. These are all changes that we see in Ellie. Also, a lot of people say the relationship isn't the same between Joel and Ellie. And yeah, it's not. It's been 4 years. A lot has happened. People who say this are just putting themselves on blast for not playing longer than 4 hours into the game, because this aspect of their relationship is covered in flashbacks at the end of every day. We learn that Ellie's suspicions never went away, and she indeed did learn the truth of what happened back in Utah. She cuts Joel out of her life, and the relationship has been strained and cold ever since. Like I said, Naughty Dog thought of how they wanted each scene to make you feel. If an interaction between Joel and Ellie is weird and awkward, that's for a reason, and maybe you should pay attention to the game so you can figure out why. The argument that Ellie changed goes in D tier. She grew up and found out what Joel did. If you really don't think this Ellie is the same Ellie we got in part 1, you really are a baboon. The final part of Seattle Day 1 is one of those flashbacks I referred to. This one takes place not super long after the events of the first game. It's Ellie's birthday and Joel found a nearby museum to take her to. It's a really sweet memory to play through and has all of the energy that the first game had. It's clear that Joel really cares for this kid and he gives Ellie a genuinely great birthday by taking her to the museum. These flashbacks are one of those few uncontroversial parts of part 2. Many negative reviewers said that they liked these parts and wished the whole game was like this. We already talked about that sentiment and how that doesn't really matter because we should be examining the quality of the game we got and not what people thought the game would be, but I do think it was important to at least note that here. This section is a really great trip down memory lane, but there is always a sad undertone to it. A realization that this relationship is dead. It died and took a new shape when Ellie learned about the truth about the Fireflies. Joel's actions are constantly hanging in the background between the pair's interactions from here on out. In the museum, Ellie finds some anti-Firefly graffiti, and it reminds her of her constant suspicions that she acts on in the next flashback at the end of Day 2. Seattle Day 1 starts with our introduction to the new environment and this section of the world. Things all around you don't quite make perfect sense, and you're still trying to piece things together as the player. This game is a slow burn, and Seattle Day 1 acts as a light toasting of information and progress. We get a lot of character interactions with and a lot of character growth with Dina. We get to learn how big the WLF is, and we see the brutality of the scars. We still don't know where Tommy is, and Dina's probably out of action due to her pregnancy. Day 1 has some moments where Dina and Ellie reminisce together about memories they have of Joel, and it acts as a somber reminder of why you're out there. Dina manages to fix up a radio they have at the old theater and learns some information by listening in on WLF communications. One male trespasser is causing some commotion, so Ellie heads out in the morning of day 2 to go give this trespasser some assistance. Day 2 begins with Ellie heading out to help that other trespasser. Until you reach that trespasser, you play through a bunch of human encounters. Some do criticize the encounters in The Last of Us Part 2 and the gameplay. We will address that, and we will get into the details of the combat, but I think it's best addressed once we've talked about Abby a bit, seeing as she and Ellie have different kits. For now, I just want to mention the dogs. In some encounters, WLF members will have dogs with them, and I personally found the dogs quite threatening. They were easy enough to deal with just by placing a trap bomb on your scent trail or taking them out with your various stealth killing resources. The thing is, if you don't deal with the dog and forget about it, then you're pretty much guaranteed to get caught and attacked by the dog. I was almost never killed by a dog, but many times I would get caught by a dog, and in turn that would put me in a really bad situation. I would make the dog my priority target most of the time unless the dog was very far away. After clearing through some encounters, you make your way to the trespasser. Turns out it's Jesse, not Tommy. Homie followed the day after Ellie and Dina left. I like Jesse. He doesn't get a ton of hate other than the general complaint about all the new characters. He's never really singled out and explicitly hated on from what I could see. Part of me feels like that is due to the fact that he's a guy, so the neckbeards gave him a pass. Jesse is a nice guy. Genuinely. Him and Dina used to date and then recently broke up because Dina was attracted to Ellie. Jesse's reaction to Dina breaking up with him and then dating their mutual friend is a clear sign of maturity. If any 2 IQ incels are still watching, I'm sure you're screaming, "He's a cuck!" at the screen right now. But that is the exact kind of dichotomy I'm referring to when I'm talking about Jesse. I hate to break it to y'all, but bisexual people exist. Hell, we never even get a label for Dina. She could just be a lesbian. There are many stories of gay people dating members of the opposite sex trying to make it work with no success. The label doesn't matter though. Point is, Jesse responds to this like an adult. He understands that relationships are not always forever, and in most cases, they're not. Jesse is secure about who he is and his place in the world, so while he's probably hurt by Dina leaving him, and seeing her with Ellie is definitely hard on him, he's treating the situation like an adult. Responding to a situation like this with hate towards Ellie and Dina is the dumb fuck childish thing to do. Jesse is more than allowed to be hurt, and he's allowed to even put some distance between himself and the pair if he needs to, but lashing out is never the answer. If you think Jesse is a cuck and a loser for the way he responds to this situation, then you yourself are much more likely to be a cuck and a loser. Like I said, I didn't see much Jesse hate, but I do like this character and wanted to talk about him and this aspect, but we're not going to rank it. After finding they make their way back into the theater where we get the next flashback section. This flashback might be my favorite of them. It starts with Ellie and Tommy going on patrol, and Tommy brings up Joel. The tension between Ellie and Joel has been undeniable in the months since they've returned from Salt Lake. Ellie never bought his lie, and it's been festering inside her for a long time. Tommy encourages Ellie to work through her feelings towards Joel and to give him another chance. Ellie thinks on these words until they get back to the patrol lodge they're staying at with Joel. Tommy really wants Joel and Ellie to work things out, so he suggests that they go look for new guitar strings in a nearby town. After some pressure, Joel and Ellie head out. Before they can make it to the music store, they get stuck clearing out a bunch of infected that are inside of a hotel that they make their way through. It ends up being quite a large group of infected, including a bloater. To end things on an even more morbid note, they find the bodies of these 2 dead teenagers that went missing from Jackson about a year ago. The missing teenagers were set up earlier on, and now here they are. The teen's death note sets something off inside of Ellie after she reads it. The teens wrote about how they left Jackson to do some good in this world, possibly help create a place just as safe as Jackson. They wanted their lives to mean something. That's what Ellie wants. It's why she said in part 1 that she was willing to die for the cure. Ellie really confronts Joel in this moment about Salt Lake. She's frustrated that he didn't just wait for her to wake up so she could speak to the Fireflies. Joel is a real dick to Ellie here. He needs to shut her questions down because the truth is not something Joel is ready to share. This only serves to further deepen the divide between the pair. These flashbacks are the reason why I really dismiss the argument that the game could have been made about something else. It's not like Naughty Dog just ignored the drama that went down between Joel and Ellie in part 2. People will non-stop frame it like the game just ignores this piece of their history when in fact it's still a huge part of the game. We do get the story of what goes down between Joel and Ellie. It just isn't the main focus of the game is all. It falls in line with the game's overall slow burn feeling. Instead of just linearly dropping all of the drama and then getting into the game chooses to throw us into the world, and it has you as a player piece context together before the game outright reveals information to you. I know I said this, but I really like this type of storytelling. Moving forward from Ellie's flashback, Dina's able to get some information about one of their target's locations. According to the radio, Nora has been sent to the nearby hospital to gather medical supplies, so Ellie heads out to find her, hoping to gain some information about Abby's location. Most encounters are pretty normal leading up to the hospital, except one that I really like. While looting an optional building, you come across a locked door inside of an apartment. It's locked, so you just move on looting, no big deal. Once you sit down to fix your tools though, Ellie is grabbed by a wolf and then a pretty fast and pretty brutal fight starts. What happened is this apartment is a WLF safe house. The team staying there was locked in a room hanging out when they hear Ellie try the door. Once they come out and see some freak on their workbench, the fighting starts. It's a really great detail that makes a lot of sense in this world. Ellie is running amok throughout Seattle. It makes sense that she would eventually just stumble across a group of wolves. It's also a fun jump scare. Another notable thing about this section is it involves your first encounter with scars. When finding the scars, they'll call out signals by whistling. I love the scars whistling. It adds this weird, stressful tone to their encounters because they're clearly communicating, but you have zero clue what they're saying to each other. Also, watching them hang a man and then cut his guts out while he's still alive is brutal. They really are quite the insane cult, and we'll talk about them more in Abby's section. Once making it to the hospital, Ellie learns where Nora's at and makes her way to her location in the hospital. With a few casualties along the way, of course. Ellie gets to Nora and tries and fails to get information from her before she manages to run off. Ellie chases after her and eventually grabs her, but is cornered by other wolves. So she kills herself. Ellie throws herself and Nora down to the lower level that is filled with infected. This is actually a death sentence for Nora because she has no mask to filter the spores. Ellie, though, is immune. After another really cool encounter where you pitch humans against infected, Ellie runs after and finds Nora coughing in the basement. Nora sees that Ellie isn't coughing and realizes that she's the immune girl that the Fireflies had wanted. Nora, like the others in Abby's group, used to be a Firefly. Ellie says shut the fuck up by smacking her with a pipe and then proceeds to beat Abby's location out of Nora. Ellie returns to Dina and Jesse super fucked up. She let herself go while beating Nora, and it's clear she's very shaken with her actions. Ellie would defend Joel's past rougher actions with the exception of his actions taken to save her. When asked or if it was brought up in conversation, Ellie would keep it vague. It's clear that while she still loved Joel, she recognized that he's done a lot of fucked up shit. It's another element to Ellie's story and character arc. She's becoming more and more like Joel. For example, earlier she talks about how she used Joel's interrogation technique before, and Dina finds it a little gruesome to pit two people against each other the way that they do. Without getting too sidetracked, I did want to bring something up really quick. The dynamic between the characters has been each character trying to pull Ellie back in some way with her constantly ignoring them. It starts with Tommy trying to get Ellie to stay before Tommy decides to go himself so Ellie will stay. Then, Dina and the others, mostly on day 3, encourage Ellie to be satisfied with the revenge she's gotten so far. By the end of day 2, many of the people involved with Joel's death are dead. Ellie's descent into brutality is a big part of her character arc in The Last of Us 2. Ellie brutally beating Nora is a big step in this arc. We don't see exactly what Ellie does to her, but based on her reaction once she returns to the theater, it's very clear that what she did was fucked. Ellie's seen a lot of shit, and if this incident has her looking like a Vietnam vet, then it was probably pretty bad. The moment between Dina and Ellie is really sweet too. Ellie is covered in scrapes and bruises, and Dina comes to help clean her up. After a moment, Dina reassures Ellie and then just sits in silence with her. It's hard to appropriately showcase this scene's feelings without just playing the game. Finally, day 2 ends with one last flashback. This is the big one. Ellie ran off from Jackson and made her way back to Utah. Once there, she explores the hospital to figure out what the hell happened. She doesn't know officially what Joel did, but the clues are pretty telling. Joel's been tracking Ellie and finally catches up to her after she's explored the hospital. Ellie instantly confronts Joel about his actions and tells him that if he doesn't tell her the truth right this second, then she's gone for good. She won't even go back to Jackson. So Joel tells her, kind of. He keeps it vague, but the implication is clear. Ellie understands that Joel killed to save her. She tells Joel that they're done. She'll go back to Jackson, but that's it. Otherwise, they're done. Day 2's focus is much more on the world of Seattle. We finally get to fight the Scars in a very large and long encounter, and of course, we kill plenty of wolves as well. Jesse is a feature of Day 2. We get a bit more time with him on Day 3 before his death, but this is the bulk of our time spent with him. I gave y'all a spoiler warning at the beginning, okay? I'm just gonna drop bombs. Yeah, Jesse dies at the end of Day 3, unfortunately. Last of Us Part 2 is structured in 2 3-day sections, each from a different character's perspective. So Day 3 is where a lot of the climax happens. Day 3 opens with an oddly hot shot of Ellie's back. She's fucked up and covered in wounds. Makes sense with all she's been through. Dina is sleeping and Jesse pulls Ellie aside to talk. He figured things out yesterday while Ellie went out on her own. The signs are starting to get decently clear. Ellie admits to him that yes, Dina is pregnant. Seeing that the two were dating just a couple months ago, the child is most definitely Jesse's. Jesse's response is just another clear sign of his maturity. He's more than willing to accept any coming responsibility, and he's not mad at Dina for not telling him yet. It's just unfortunate that in around 12 hours, he's gonna have a hole in his head. Jesse and Ellie head out together to head to the aquarium. Ellie learned that this could possibly be Abby's hiding spot from Nora's beatdown the night before. After making their way a bit into the city, the pair learns about Tommy's possible location. Jesse wants to go help Tommy because finding Tommy was their main goal. They had no leads on Tommy except they knew that he would be hunting the same people that they are, so in order to maximize their chances of finding him, they wanted to go find Abby. However, now that they have this new info, Jesse wants to change course and head to the lead. Ellie's focus is still directly on Abby and she is determined to go to the aquarium. A lot of the bad shit that happens in this game wouldn't have happened if Ellie had just listened to someone for 2 seconds. This is one of those scenarios. We learn in the second half when we play as Abby that Abby is one of the advancing soldiers attacking Tommy. So if Ellie had just listened to Jesse here, the events at the aquarium wouldn't have taken place and in turn, neither would have the events to follow. There are many moments in Ellie's story like this, and it's a more subtle feature that's much more noticeable on a second playthrough of the game. So Jesse heads off to help Tommy while Ellie continues forward with trying to get a boat. See, Seattle got bombed a few years into the outbreak, just like a bunch of other major cities that were overrun with infected. All of that plus 25 years of no maintenance has caused a very large river to form in the middle of the city. The fastest way to get to the aquarium is through this river. The only other clear option is a highway that's very far away and very exposed. I like the boat portion. It's a very cool set piece that provides a great break from the typical encounters. Most of the exploring here is optional, but you are forced into a pretty cool boss fight. Most of the previous bloater encounters haven't really been boss fights. They all felt at most like a mini boss. This bloater, however, actually feels like a boss. Same with the bloater you fight in the flashback earlier with Joel too, now that I think about it. Generally, the bloaters are more aggressive in part 2, and the fact that they can smash through walls really adds a threat factor. This bloater feels the most like a boss due to the clear boss arena it's in. You fight it in an arcade and the environment is built really well to assist you in the fight. It's not like in part 1 where you kinda just run around in the gym shooting the bloater till it dies. But instead it's an actual threatening, fear-inducing boss as it destroys the arena around you. Once you manage to beat the boss fight, Ellie moves on and makes it to the aquarium. Once inside, Ellie is instantly attacked by a dog that she kills quickly. Following some voices, Ellie comes across Owen and Mel. Ellie holds them at gunpoint and is much less aggressive with the pair than she was with the other survivors. It's never directly addressed what Ellie's true intentions were in this moment, but based on the things Ellie does, we can pretty safely assume that she was willing to let Owen and Mel go. If you recall, when Joel was killed, a lot of the group wanted to kill Ellie and Tommy too, but Owen was a major defender of letting them live. We see that scene from Ellie's point of view, and while her ears were ringing in the moment, you could tell through body language what was going on. Owen stands between the would-be killer and Ellie. Ellie's recognized all the survivors, and so she most definitely remembers Owen and Mel and their actions and reactions during Joel's death. Owen and Mel, on the flip side, have zero reason to trust Ellie. They know about a few of their friends' death, and they both understand why Ellie is asking for information on Abby. It's an understandable assumption that their lives are in danger. Owen makes a move, and so Ellie shoots him in the struggle. Mel grabs a knife and tries to get to Ellie, but thanks to mashing square enough times, Ellie is able to turn the knife around on Mel. Ellie's killed plenty of times, and she wouldn't really be too upset by these people's deaths until she notices Owen's dying gestures. He's reaching for Mel and trying to say something, so Ellie investigates and discovers that Mel was around 6 months pregnant. This is on another level for Ellie. Yes, she was defending herself, but she still killed a pregnant woman and wiped out an entire family. This is extra heavy for Ellie with everything going on with Dina, and she starts to have a panic attack. Tommy and Jesse arrive at the aquarium around this time and get Ellie the hell out of there and back to the theater. Once back at the theater, Ellie's able to compose herself. Ellie, Jesse, and Tommy all talk about their plans. They're going back. Abby's not dead, but legit everyone else is, and with everything going on and with Dina being pregnant, it's just time to go. The plan is to leave in the morning. Tommy goes off to show off a chain he grabbed for his wife. Jesse and Ellie bond for one last time when they hear Tommy yell. The pair run right into the lobby to help, and Abby caps Jesse and barely misses Ellie. Abby found them and she's ready for more blood, and this is where Ellie's section ends. We don't even come close to finishing that climax. We still don't know what will happen to Tommy, and we still don't know what will happen to Ellie or Dina. Before we jump into Abby's section, let's talk about one thing that we've touched on throughout. Naughty Dog has done nothing up till now to make you hate Abby any less, and that is on purpose. This is going to tie into a criticism that will rank later on, but Naughty Dog wants you to fucking hate Abby going into her section. Many players were filled with rage when they had to play as Abby, and even angrier when they figured out they had to play 3 days as Abby. I was in that group to start. I was pretty angry about playing as Abby until pretty much the end of day 3. I wasn't angry that Lev was transgender or that Abby was a woman, but I was pissed that the game was making me play as this pile of shit for so long. Here's the thing. While that anger filled my body, I kept having these major moments of cognitive dissonance. I kept seeing things in the wolves that was reflected in other characters in The Last of Us. I genuinely enjoyed Manny and Abby's interactions, and the pair seemed like really good friends. All of the WLF members have layers and details to them that we just don't see from Ellie's perspective. All of this is part of what makes The Last of Us Part 2 so incredible. We will most definitely dive into that as we talk about Abby's section a bit more. We're introduced to Abby with a flashback. The day her dad dies, or as we better know it, the day Joel saved Ellie. The forest Abby runs through is very Utah. I've most definitely been in woods like these. For those of you who didn't see my part 1 video, go do that. But I talk about how I'm from Utah, and I think it's cool how much of the game takes place in Salt Lake City. After some exploring, Abby's able to find her dad, and oh man, this man is Mormon. Like, he was definitely a member of the Mormon church before the outbreak. Here's my headcanon for Abby's dad. Homeboy was in his early 20s, like 21 or 22, going to the University of Utah's med school when the outbreak happens. And boom, he is here. His face just screams Mormon to me. Abby's dad seems like a genuinely nice guy. You can hate Abby all you want for killing Joel, but her dad was legitimately murdered in cold blood by Joel. You can argue that he was going to kill Ellie or whatever, but let's be honest here. Ellie losing her life for a vaccine would be the morally correct decision. It just objectively is. It would end this nightmare for the entire world. A lot of power and impact that comes with The Last of Us Part 1's ending is the fact that Joel does some fucked up shit to save Ellie. Joel's so embarrassed about this that he can't even admit that he killed people to Ellie when he confesses. He just says he stopped them. I feel like people treat Joel like Eren Yeager in a lot of ways. Don't worry, no Attack on Titan spoilers here. But one thing I love about Attack on Titan is the moral grayness that comes with a lot of actions taken in the show. I made a massive video on it because I had so much to say about how the show presents an unclear good and evil. A lot of characters take fucked up actions, and a small portion of the Attack on Titan fan base likes to glorify all of the wrong things. It's like when someone watches The Joker and goes, "That is so me, man." I think the same group of people who misinterpret Attack on Titan are the same group of people who were unable to see past their hate for Abby. The commentators I spoke about earlier fit this description perfectly. They each clearly supported Joel's actions at the end of the first game and call it the morally correct decision. It's not the morally correct action, and that's a huge part of what makes it so impactful. The point of that ending was to show what Joel was willing to do to keep Ellie in his life. And that point is that Joel was willing to slaughter dozens, including nurses and doctors, and likely destroying the world's chance at a vaccine, all to save Ellie. I don't want to dive too deep into that because again, I made a whole video on part 1 and this was kind of the thesis of the video, so go watch that if you're interested. My point with all this is that despite the hate I had for Abby on my first playthrough, I was able to see through that hate and feel for the younger Abby when she loses her dad. His death was unjustified and it genuinely damaged the world because he was the Firefly's only doctor with knowledge on how to make a vaccine. Cutting to the start of Seattle Day 1, we meet Manny. Manny is goated. I'm sorry, I don't personally care if you like any of the wolves / ex-Fireflies, and I don't think you need to like these characters to enjoy and get the message of this game. However, if you hate Manny, that's a clear red flag that you just want to hate this game because Manny is a decent fella. Seeing him care for his dad right before you head out with him is really sweet. Now we do have one criticism to address right here at the start, and it's one that the game got dragged for a lot. Abby's appearance. It's clear from the moment we meet Abby that she's a muscly woman. Even with her winter gear on at the start of the game, you can tell she's buff. A lot of people hated this. I hate to break it to everyone, but females still lift weights. I've gotten into fitness and weightlifting over the past year, and in that time I've seen many buff women. I've had times where I lay down on the bench press feeling super strong with one plate on each side, only to look over and see this insanely ripped 40-year-old woman benching 260. Yes, men naturally produce more testosterone, so on average, men are going to be stronger than women. Sure, that's just science. However, the top 1% of women, just like the top 1% of men, are still absolute powerhouses of muscle. Any top-level female bodybuilder is going to outclass 90% of men. That being said, some go a little bit further and claim that there's no way that Abby could have gained that physique in this world. I completely disagree. Abby is pretty thin when we first meet her, and years later she's put on a ton of muscle. In that time, Abby's been a part of the Wolves, a military organization that would most definitely have their soldiers doing heavy training. Plus, the way Abby and Owen talk about weights make it clear that this has become a hobby for Abby as well. It's more than reasonable to assume she's lifting 5 days a week with what the Wolves have her working on and her own personal training. From everything we see about the Wolves, it's clear that they're very well equipped. It is more than fair to assume that Abby has not been starving these past 4 years. With everything we'd see, I'd go as far to say it would be easy for Abby to put on muscle with the resources the Wolves have. One last point about this. People claim that Abby is not natty, and I agree. One of the biggest side effects of steroids is a bigger heart and in turn a shorter life. In a world where most people die by 30, the negative health effects of steroids really wouldn't be a concern, and the immense strength boost you get from using them would be a massive advantage. All over the world we find medicine. We don't see the full outbreak, but in most zombie media and in what we see of the outbreak, it spreads fast, quick, and gets like 97% of the population. It's safe to assume there would be lootable steroids around, and I would even go as far to say that the Wolves would probably give their soldiers steroids. In this anarchy-fueled world, losing 10 years off your life from steroid use is not a problem. I'm putting this criticism in C tier. I can see how a buff lady comes off-putting to someone who hasn't seen a female bodybuilder before. Our media paints women as petite and small almost 100% of the time, so having a buff female character pretty much guarantees she's going to be hated by society on that feature alone. This criticism does indeed lie in misogyny for most who argue it. Even if you're not attracted to muscular women, that shouldn't make it have any impact on your enjoyment of the game. You don't need to fuck every character on screen. The final thing I'll touch on before Abby and Manny can leave the bunker is the character Jordan. He's the asshat who wanted to kill Ellie and who Ellie knifes when the group kills Joel. In the Jackson scene, he really seems like a one-note, hot-headed asshole. However, if you choose to talk to him here, you can see that he's actually really friendly with his friends and he has more depth to him than just angry bad guy. It's one short conversation, so it's not like the deepest character in the world, but the point is that right from the start of Abby's story, the game starts to contradict what you think. The Wolf base is very cool. I especially love the stadium turned into a town. Really great world building. Every time we go somewhere new in the first game and in the second game, it's always really interesting and filled with various responses to the outbreak. We also get introduced to the real Mel here. Before in Jackson, Mel was just in shock and we really didn't get to see her character. But here in Seattle, she's more at ease. She's kind of what you'd expect. A little less keen for the darker side of things. She'd rather heal people as a medic. At first glance, she might seem like a pushover, but we learn later in the story that she actually has quite the spine. Once they're out on patrol, they get ambushed by Scars. While running from the Scars, they crash and escape by hiding inside of a nearby construction warehouse. Pretty much Home Depot. I really like this encounter. I really like the environment and it's just a fun encounter. It's nothing crazy or special, I just like it. Like, do I have to write 3 paragraphs about every encounter I like? Can I just like one? What I don't like is the goddamn boat puzzle. I remembered this puzzle my second time around, but I did not remember what to do. What I remembered was being stuck on it for a bit, and that happened again. Fuck this puzzle. If you hate the game for the boat puzzle, then that's an S tier argument. The group manages to meet up with the other wolves and then move on to the main base they were headed to. Mel gets stitched up while Abby and Manny head off to see a body. It's their dead friend, and to make things worse, the wolves think Owen killed him. Owen and Abby have history and in fact used to date. We get to see a lot of this in Abby's next flashback. She and Owen had recently joined the wolves and were out in the city blowing off training together. This is when Owen first comes across the old aquarium. It's pretty out of the way and hard to get to, so most people just leave the place alone. Owen and Abby, and then later Owen and Mel, make this place their little hiding spot. Besides providing backstory to Owen and Abby and their dynamic, this scene also serves to show Abby's mindset. Owen really wants to ditch training and Abby is adamant about going back to make it in time. Abby expresses that she needs to train so she can go after Joel. It's important to note that Abby's drive for revenge never went away. Owen's weighing on Abby's thoughts at the end of Seattle Day 1, so with Manny's help, she sneaks out in the evening to go find him and figure out what the hell happened. She's heading to the aquarium because she's pretty certain that he's hiding out there. While trying to sneak her way over there, she gets bonked by Scars. This shoots us into another flashback. This one's brief and takes place just a couple months before Joel's death. It mainly just serves to continue to build out the relationships between Owen, Abby, and Mel. When Abby wakes up from her little bonk, she's about to get scarred. Scars execute their victims by getting them ready to hang, cutting their guts out while they're alive, and then kicking the stool out from under them so they hang to death. It's super brutal. The Scars set Abby up for execution when she's saved by some internal drama going on within the Scars. The Scars actually have 2 reasons for attacking the mainland lately. The Scars live on an island, by the way. First, they're attacking to try to push back the wolves. The 2 factions have been at war for ages with one brief peace period. The second reason why there are so many Scar patrols out is because of some kids. 2 kids escaped from the Scars and are being hunted at the time for unknown reasons. Abby helps the kids fight the Scars, but as a result starts to hang herself. The kids cut her down as a thank you. The sister of the pair, Yara, got her arm obliterated in the fight by a hammer, so it's up to Abby with her fists and Lev with his bow to fight off incoming infected. As a thanks to the pair, she sticks with them and helps them find shelter. Once she hides the kids in a trailer park, she finishes making her way to the aquarium. Owen is indeed at the aquarium, drinking away his feelings. Abby speaks to him and figures out what the hell happened. Owen did kill their friend Danny. They were fighting some Scars, and after Owen smacks one, the guy kind of just gives up. He looked tired. Something about that really got to Owen and he just couldn't kill him. Danny didn't like that and got in his face about it, and so Owen shot him in the struggle. Owen's plan is to take his boat he's been working on and sail to Santa Barbara. There are rumors that the Fireflies are grouping back up down there and he's ready to leave this Seattle hellhole behind. He wants Abby to come and they start fighting, which of course turns into fucking. A lot of people don't like the sex scene and the game got a lot of shit for it and for the less explicit scene between Ellie and Dina. And to be honest, why care? Like, to be honest, all the arguments I saw against this scene were either prudish in nature, which is so fucking dumb because this is a game where you can blow someone's leg off and watch them scream and bleed out to death. And the second thing I heard the most regarding this scene is Abby isn't hot, which is subjective. I'm not personally attracted to her. Like, I like me some muscle mommies, but Abby specifically just... no thanks. But guess what, guys? You don't have to get a boner from everyone. It's only like a 20-second scene and it's not even that graphic in the first place. We see some muscly boobs and that's it. It's fine if you just personally don't like sex scenes in media, but that's not what I was hearing from most people in this regard. To be honest, I'm not bothered by nudity. Adult nudity to me adds or removes from a work depending on the way it's used. I'm not personally a huge fan of animes that are just explicitly boobs and fan service and really nothing else. But on the flip side, when used artistically or stylistically, adult nudity can really add a lot to a piece of work. For example, in the first volume of Berserk, there is a very graphic orgy scene around a Satan statue. The art is able to convey this very intense and ominous feeling through the nudity portrayed. The art is able to convey a very intensely ominous tone due to the combination of the nudity and the satanic imagery. This moment in Berserk would not nearly have the amount of tonal impact and weight that it carries if everyone in the orgy was censored using underwear or by using sneakier methods like just obscuring the boobs and shit like that. While The Last of Us Part 2 doesn't by any means focus on the nudity, my point with that whole spiel is when used appropriately, nudity can really add to a work. This scene on the boat I think is a more than appropriate use of nudity. It's a very brief scene because it's not really the focus. The point of the scene is to increase the character drama in between Abby and Owen and in turn Mel. Owen just cheated on his current partner with his ex-girlfriend, someone who they're both very close with. So the scene stays for as long as it needs to really get that message across, and then the game moves on. This criticism would be more valid if it was insanely drawn out or like really unnecessarily graphic or something, but it's not, so this goes in C tier. Abby wakes up at the start of day 2 due to a nightmare about the Seraphite children she met the night before. The Seraphites is the real name of the Scars, by the way. The wolves just call them Scars due to their distinctive scars they cut into their members. Abby goes back to the trailer she left the kids in and has to step over bodies to get back inside. Yara, the sister, is not doing well and her arm is beyond fucked up. Abby grabs her and takes her back to the aquarium. Mel had also snuck out at this point to find her partner and Abby, and so she's at the aquarium when they get back. Mel informs the group that the arm is in dire condition and Yara will die in a day or two if it is not treated. Lev and Abby leave to find supplies at the nearby hospital, the same one where Ellie will kill Nora later tonight. Adventuring through Seattle is stunning as always, however, it's not very fast. Lev suggests they take the Seraphite bridges that span above the buildings. Over the years, they've set up some bridges at the top of the remaining buildings in order to help them move around quicker and away from WLF eyes. While trying to reach the elevator to get to the bridge, you fight some Seraphites and hear them say something interesting. See, the Scars all clearly dead-name Lev. Up till now, Lev has been honest with Abby. He said the Scars were after the pair because Lev shaved his head. That is true, but there's some more info that was left out. Lev is AFAB, or assigned female at birth. I'm not trying to get into a big argument about transgender issues here. That's why I addressed the LGBTQ characters our political argument right at the start. Without going too deep, transgender people exist all around you. I've had quite a few friends come out to me as transgender in private over the past few years, and let me just say, you'd be quite surprised. I promise you that you know someone who is either deep in the closet or just not out to you. 1% of the population is transgender. You can claim it's bullshit numbers or social pressure or whatever other crap you want. I'm not here to convince you of that today. It's just a fact that transgender people exist and are valid, and having a trans character is not political. Lev's trans identity isn't even the focus of his character. We have this moment where the Scars dead name him, and another moment later between Lev and Abby about his identity. But other than that, that's it. His character focus is the relationship and trust that gets built between him, Yara, and Abby. Hating a game for having a transgender character is a stupid bitch-ass baby move to do. After clearing the Scars, you finally make it to the bridge. This bridge is fucking insane. It's some Kaiji Ultimate Survivor type shit. I like it as a set piece and as a part of the world building, but man, I have a real life fear of heights, and let me just say, I could never ever do anything like this, ever. When almost across, the pair falls. Game over. Just kidding, they land in a pool. I will say, I don't love this moment. It seems very, very Marvel movie and plot armor-ish. I would have much preferred a different set of events that led to the pair getting trapped in the building that they get stuck in. There have been a couple unrealistic moments in the story so far, but I've just ignored them because they were typically unrealistic for gameplay reasons. For example, when Jesse and Ellie team up for the first time in Seattle, you do a kind of railgun getaway shootout, and it's pretty unrealistic. But it's unrealistic in order to create a fun gameplay experience. With this moment being a cutscene, I have more of an issue with that. This is one of those rare pieces of criticism you'll see me levy towards this game, so appreciate it. I won't rank this because it's just a nitpick I have and not a major issue. While I don't love how the pair makes it into the building, I do love the encounters that follow. See, just like the other building, the Seraphites use elevators to move up and down the building. No one ever goes inside the building, and that becomes very clear because it's filled with infected and spores. This set piece is really cool. I love going down this building. It's obliterated on the inside and you have to figure out a way down while dealing with the large amounts of infected inside the building. This is one aspect The Last of Us 2 just blows out of the water. So many moments and set pieces in this game are really cool and much better designed. In The Last of Us Part 1, plenty of environments looked great and were very interesting, but like I discussed earlier, it was always very obvious where you needed to go due to the use of the color yellow. On top of this, it was painfully obvious when you were walking into an encounter in The Last of Us Part 1. Once you see a bunch of evenly spaced cover in an area, you know you're about to fight. In Part 2, however, the set pieces and areas not only look better due to the improved graphics, but they're just designed much better overall. In encounters, the cover is much less obvious and fits much better into the world. Instead of uniform square and rectangle cover like in Part 1, you have cars and benches, and even the simple addition of going prone adds so much design to every encounter. There are a few encounters where it's almost impossible to actually take cover due to the sparse area. The encounters all have much more verticality to them and are all considerably longer as well. What would have been an 8 infected encounter in Part 1 turns into a 4-phase encounter consisting of 20 infected total in Part 2. The design is just better in Part 2. Once you make it to the bottom of the floor and beat the bloater that's waiting for you there, you're able to leave the building. Abby has Lev stay behind and hide because he will get shot on sight by the wolves. Abby goes right up to the hospital and walks in. Keep in mind, Abby is AWOL right now. Abby was told specifically not to go look for Owen and to focus on the current upcoming battle with the Seraphites, but she did the exact opposite and dipped. The hospital guards don't know this right away, so they let Abby through. They're suspicious and call the main base, confirming that Abby's supposed to be there, and find out that she is not. So they lock her up and are going to send her back to base with the next load of supplies. Nora, who Ellie is going to kill in a few hours, comes to see Abby and asks what the hell is going on. Abby tells her that Owen is hurt and needs medical supplies. Most of the supplies have been shipped off already, but Nora lets Abby go and tells her the basement hasn't been looted yet and there will likely be supplies down there. I really like this hospital section due to the world significance. The basement of this hospital is where Patient Zero for Seattle was taken. It's hinted at throughout by the collectibles in the environment around you. What really sells this piece of information for me is the big boss fight that takes place in the hospital basement. In the world of The Last of Us, infected start as runners. Then as the infection takes hold, they slowly grow into clickers and then into bloaters and so on. Being that Patient Zero for Seattle was taken here, it makes sense that any remaining infected here would likely be pretty taken over by the fungus. Hence, we get the big boss. I like this boss fight. I died a few times fighting it, even on my second playthrough. I do think that once you figure out how to use the environment around you to move around the boss, it gets easier. It does take a few tries to figure that out though, due to the boss's overwhelming aggressiveness. To make matters worse, one of the infected that's fused into this monstrosity breaks off and makes the fight a lot harder. You need to avoid this guy because if you don't, he'll grab you and that pretty much guarantees you that the big guy is going to get you. Great fight. Once you've killed that unholy devil and escaped the hospital, Abby heads straight back to the aquarium. Mel takes Yara right into surgery and the next thing you know, she's down an arm. But that means her body can actually start to heal now. Up till now, Abby's been having nightmares about her dad's death and the kid's safety. But tonight, she dreams of her dad and this time he's alive. Day 3 doesn't waste time. It's never really clear if Mel explicitly found out about Abby and Owen doing the hanky-panky, but she makes something clear with Abby. She feels the tension and at least recognizes something is going on. Mel tells Abby that she needs to lay the fuck off Owen. Owen is going to Santa Barbara to find the Fireflies and Mel tells Abby one thing. If Abby goes with him, she stays. And if Mel goes, Abby cannot come. Lev also had plans to start shit this morning because he runs off to go back to the island to find their mom. Lev and Yara want to go with Owen and Mel, and Lev really wants their mother to join them and escape the Seraphites. So he runs off to try to get her. Abby agrees to help Yara go find Lev and bring him back. While running to the boats, Manny tackles Abby. A sniper, Tommy, is sitting off in the distance just picking off wolves, and Manny and his team have been tasked to stop him. Everyone else on Manny's team has been popped. This sniper section is improved from the sniper section in The Last of Us 1 in my opinion. It's harder to avoid Tommy's bullets in this section, and so it makes dealing with and sneaking towards Tommy much harder. This isn't to say the sniper section in part 1 is bad, I really like it as well. I just think this one's overall more challenging and constricting than the sniper encounter in part 1. Once you reach Tommy, Manny gets his brains blown out. Dude, this is so brutal. Just bam, homie's dead with blood all over Abby. I'm traumatized and I didn't even really know Manny. Tommy and Abby get into a fight and Tommy falls into the ocean in the process. Moving forward, Abby and Yara grab a boat from the nearby docks and head to the Seraphite Island. The Seraphite Island is awesome. Insane death cult aside, the aesthetic is really great. Once the outbreak is done, this island is going to make for great Airbnbs. This island is another fantastic example of Naughty Dog's world building. Just like the cannibals in the first game, a town like Jackson, a military group like the Wolves, these Seraphites are a pretty understandable response to the outbreak. Don't get me wrong, they're fucking insane. What I mean is that as far as people go, an insane cult taking power during a time of crisis is nothing new. If you doubt that, look at Heaven's Gate, Scientology, Jehovah's Witness, and even Mormons. Obviously, those each go down in severity, but the cult-like elements in each all carry over to the Seraphites. For example, the Seraphites will kill members who disobey. In Jehovah's Witness, if you leave the faith, all who knew you in the religion must shun you forever, including family, essentially killing you socially. If they don't shun you and are caught keeping in contact with you, then they themselves are kicked out and shunned. They don't kill you, but they kill you socially. That's real. Don't believe me? All you have to do is Google Jehovah's Witness Rule 34. Point of all this is that the Seraphites are really well represented as an extremist religion. And it makes sense that people would turn to an extreme faith like that in the time of crisis, especially if that group provides them some safety. Here on the island, you're faced with a few encounters before finding Lev and Yara's home. At this point, I think it's finally time we talk about the combat. Some of the criticisms laid at the game revolve around the combat being bad, old-fashioned, and simple. First, like we discussed earlier, encounter design is just better in part 2. Encounters tend to be very vertical and sprawling. Take for example these encounters with the scars. You find among houses and buildings filled with various types of furniture and cover. Also, in a few areas there are water pools you can swim through for added stealth opportunities. There are many different ways you can approach this encounter. You could use the water to get a new position and do some stealth kills. You could sneak low and prone on the high ground while picking Seraphites off with your crossbow. Or hell, you could say fuck it, whip out your rifle and go in for an all-out gunfight if you think you have enough supplies to manage that kind of fight. Ellie's kit worked just the same. Each character had multiple stealth weapons at their fingertips that, while similar, worked in unique ways. I personally preferred Abby's kit overall. This was mainly for her easily produced throwable bombs. Ellie has bombs too, she just leaves them as traps instead, so they're more limited. Small differences in their kits like this really impact how you want to play. With Abby, you get a lot of ammo for her rifle, and a headshot with it is an insta-kill, so I would typically just try hard an encounter with half a clip when playing as Abby. On the flip side with Ellie, I would find myself mainly using craftable arrows and the pistol silencer to stay stealthy and low. The melee combat is improved too. Before, melee hits were pretty much one hits with a weapon. However, in Last of Us Part 2, depending on how you strike an enemy will determine how many hits it takes to take them down. Typically, it takes 3 to 4 hits to kill an enemy with a melee weapon, with some exceptions. If you surprise the enemy, you can insta-kill them, or if they're stunned, you can insta-kill or kill them in 2 hits. There are some rare melee weapons that you can find that are always one-hit kills, but they have a very low durability and you don't really get access to them very often. The combat as a whole is high intensity. There is a lot of stealth gameplay, but you must always pay attention and be on your toes. If you're spotted, then your options are either stand your ground and fight off the advancing enemies, or get the hell out of there and into cover somewhere else. A lot of encounters go like this. Stealth kill a couple enemies until you fuck up and are seen, then stand your ground, shoot a couple, maybe even melee a guy or two, and then sprint the fuck out of there and hide. The combat in Part 2 is far more engaging than the combat in Part 1. Part 1 gave you tools and the combat was fun, but it was more repetitive. There were only so many ways to approach an encounter. Encounters tend to be built on a 2D plane with a clear forward path through the area. Again, not to say Last of Us 1 encounters are bad, there are a number of them that are quite fantastic. My point is that Part 2 takes the encounters and ripped away a lot of the repetition when approaching an encounter by giving you more unique tools across Abby and Ellie's kits and by creating a more open play area. The simple additions of prone movement really does add a lot to encounters. Each area is designed with all of your tools in mind. I find the criticism that the gameplay and counter design are bad just plain wrong. It's one thing to say, I don't personally like stealth games, so a lot of the game was boring for me. It's another thing to say the game design is bad, bland, and boring. C tier. I'm sure by now you've noticed the bulk of things in C and D tier, but what did you expect? The title of this video was an unapologetic defense of The Last of Us Part 2. I obviously like this game. But besides my obvious enjoyment of the game, I think there's another reason why I'm ranking all these criticisms so low. While the arguments in C tier could come from someone who's arguing in good faith, most of them are still pretty 2 IQ baby brain shit. I could see someone who just watched a couple hate videos on the game and that's it, repeat some of these watered down arguments. And I can see that same person being able to put aside these criticisms if they gave the game an honest chance. In the same vein, a lot of these C tier arguments get presented in a much more twisted and sinister light. Things got blown out of proportion, twisted into things they weren't, and just straight up lied about, all to perpetuate hate towards this game. Some did this because they actually hate LGBTQ people, and other people did it because they were just making money. People who fit this category I find a lot harder to crack, especially if they were making money off pushing the game hate. When having conversations with someone who's too far gone, they just boil down into you constantly repeating yourself, with the hater of the game either not listening or not understanding your arguments. That's a big reason why I've put so many of these criticisms in C tier. There are one or two that I would maybe consider putting in B tier if they were made from a place of good faith. The issue is, 75% of the people arguing these arguments are not coming from a place of good faith. Out of all the creators I checked out for this video, only Mutahar, the creator of Some Ordinary Gamers, levied his criticisms from a place of good faith. And in his case, I still think he's wrong and was blinded by a lot of the hate that the game got. But the point is that you could actually talk to Mutahar about this game and not kill yourself by the end of the conversation. Anyway, moving forward, Abby and Yara make it to Yara's home and find Lev covered in cuts standing over their dead mother. Lev hoped to reason with his mother, but she wouldn't have it. The cult had her mind over her own kids and she started to cut at Lev, and so Lev had to defend himself. What also sucks for Lev is Yara gets capped pretty soon after. See, Abby is still deserting the WLF, and she and the kids get surrounded by WLF soldiers. Lev's going to be killed, and bad things are going to happen to Abby, so with her final breaths, Yara grabs a nearby gun and shoots the shit out of Isaac, the head of the wolves. Abby now has to fight and kill wolves. Some would say that Abby wouldn't have killed her fellow soldiers here, and this is another dogshit argument. If they had paid attention while playing the game, it's set up over the 3 days that the WLF has changed a lot over the years, and Abby herself is skeptical of being a part of the group. She explicitly mentions at one point that she doesn't know most of the WLF members at this point, and the whole organization has changed into a strange beast. D-tier argument, honestly. Pay attention to the game. I do love the encounters here against WLF. Another great example of using the multi-dimensional level design that really allows for creative play. Abby is not the reason why the WLF is here though. She's just an additional target. Isaac wants to wipe out the Seraphites in order to bring peace to this group. Eren Yeager energy, my man. So after days of setup and planning, the WLF is attacking the Seraphite Island with orders to kill all Seraphites. Riding through the main Seraphite village while the entire place is ablaze is a horribly beautiful sight and another incredible set piece. This is where I was personally able to break free from all the anger and frustration I had been feeling while playing the game. I had hated Abby just like the rest of you did for the entire time I played as her up until this moment. That's when I got it. I realized that the entire time I was being played by Naughty Dog. I was getting angrier and angrier the longer I had to play as Abby, and yet, despite this rage, I kept catching myself smiling? Moments interacting with Manny, Lev and Yara fighting like hell to keep each other, Hell, even Abby made me smile on occasion. A good piece of art needs to make you feel, and by God did this game make me feel. Anger, frustration, rage, emptiness, sadness, laughter, smiles, and every other emotion around the sun. When I rode through that burning city and felt the weight of what these characters were going through, it made it clear to me. Even though I didn't like Abby at all, I could not put that controller down. Despite the hate I had read about the game and the negative assumptions I went into the game with, the game had its claws in me from the moment it started controlling my emotions. That is good fucking art. This blazing town ends with a boss battle against a big man. There have been a few melee-only fights like this in the game, and I love these fights. It's another shake-up to the gameplay that really freshens things up. This fight in particular serves as a great finale to the Seattle section. The fight is brutal as well. Once you kill the guy, Abby and Lev grab a boat in the commotion and get the hell out of there. Once back at the aquarium, Abby finds the bodies. I like how you pretty much walk the same path that Ellie did when she killed everyone only an hour or minutes before, we're not really sure. Good detail. Ellie left her map after killing Owen and Mel because she was in shock, and Tommy and Jesse kind of just got her out of there once they arrived. Abby is able to use this map in order to figure out they're hiding at the old theater. And so now we've finally made it back. Jesse is dead on the floor with a hole in his face, Ellie's got her hands up, and Tommy has a gun to the back of his head. Tommy starts to fight when Abby is talking to Ellie and in turn gets the side of his head blown off. I noticed this time around that the bully clearly isn't a kill shot in this scene. Tommy is turning and falling when he gets shot, and we see the bullet hit the side of his head. He's most definitely hurt and he is pretty much crippled next time we see him with the healed wounds, but if you were paying attention, you could have caught this little detail before we see Tommy alive in the future cutscenes. The final fight is another piece of criticism people lay at the game, but not for the fight's quality. The fight is really good. Ellie is Ellie, so you have to watch out for the tools she has in her tool belt in order to take her down. The biggest threat is her bombs that you got to use throughout the entire game when playing as Ellie, but now you have to actively look out for them or else you go boom. And for anyone curious, yes, I did indeed let Ellie kill Abby like 6 times on my first playthrough of the game, even though I did like the game and the decisions made inside the game's story. It's still satisfying to see the bitch get shot, you know? The thing people don't like about this fight is they don't like beating up Ellie as Abby. That's the argument. I don't like Abby, so fight bad. Shut up. D tier. Like before though, the game devs knew you would be pissed here. It's part of what makes this moment so compelling. If you didn't spoil the game for yourself, you legit don't know if Ellie or Dina is going to die here. The tension here is extremely high, and having to play this fight from Abby's perspective just adds another layer of rage and emotion that makes this encounter even better. Abby is beating Ellie when Dina attacks her with a knife and is quickly taken care of by the much bulkier Abby. Abby's about to slit Dina's throat when Ellie tells her she's pregnant, and Abby says good. She would have killed Dina here no doubt if Lev wasn't there. Lev is the one who stops Abby from finishing the job here. He's detached from the situation enough and can tell that all this fighting and killing is stupid and the damage has already been done. There is no need to go any further. It does not change anything. So Abby lets them both live, tells Ellie to fuck off, and then leaves. So let's talk about another piece of criticism people have with this game. Abby let Ellie live again, even after Ellie killed her friends. Hey, let's use our brains for a bit, okay? Ellie didn't kill all of them, and Abby doesn't know about all of their deaths. Like, for example, there's no way Abby would know about what happened to Nora. Her reason for tracking them down is because of Owen and Mel's death. And while Mel and Abby had a relationship, it was clearly rocky. The real reason Abby is here is because of Owen's death, her ex-boyfriend, but it's not nearly on the same level of loss as losing her father like she did back in Salt Lake. Abby is no doubt filled with anger and sadness in this moment, but it's nothing compared to the all-encompassing hate she felt for the years leading up to Joel's death. Abby assumes she killed Tommy because she did shoot him in the head, and Jesse is no doubt dead. She's also broken Ellie's arm and beaten her face in. And she would have finished the job if not for Lev. With Lev's words, Abby thinks for a bit and comes to the decision that she's already done enough. Abby definitely understands why Ellie came back for them. After all, it's what Abby did to Joel. So because of her friend's influence, the damage she's already done, and because of her mutual understanding, Abby walks away. Her life with the wolves was already falling apart, and now with Owen gone, she's leaving anyway. C-tier argument. I think a reasonable person would expect Abby to kill Ellie here, and she would have, but the main thing that stopped her was Lev. In combination with Lev's words and all the factors around it, Abby is able to actually listen to Lev and move on. Cutting forward in time a bit, Ellie wakes up. We're not sure how long it's been right away. Ellie first looks at Joel's watch before she gets up and grabs a baby. It's pretty obvious this is Jesse and Dina's kid, and so we can safely assume it's been around a year since the events in Seattle. Early on in the game, Dina talks about wanting to have a farmhouse outside of Jackson that she can live in with her family. It's really sweet to see her and Ellie living that dream together. The environment around the home is gorgeous. It really shows off Wyoming's beauty. The home has an extremely cozy feeling to it. It's clear that the pair has been able to build a good life together despite the recent tragedies and fighting in their past. We already talked about it, but I just don't understand how some people couldn't see the chemistry between Dina and Ellie. I feel like the fact that neither partner in the relationship fits the bubbly feminine character stereotype causes a lot more of the reactionaries in the crowd to write off the relationship as a whole. The moment where the pair dances together shows a very clear and real connection between the couple. This whole portion as a whole showcases many different moments where the two obviously have chemistry and connection together. I'm not trying to repeat myself though, this video is long enough. Shortly after this moment, Ellie starts the evening chores and gets all of the sheep back in the barn. The wind slams the barn door and this triggers a PTSD attack. The attack is intense. Naturally, with one of his moms screaming like hell, JJ the baby is crying as well. Ellie's been having these attacks constantly and they've really inhibited her ability to function and survive. You can only imagine what would happen if Ellie had an attack like this with the infected around. Even with her immunity, she's still a dead woman. Soon after, we see Tommy for the first time since we saw the side of his head get blown off. He is a fucked man. He can barely walk, and from the sounds of it, he hasn't been able to walk for very long. Maria, Tommy's wife, has also kind of left Tommy. He never says divorce, but they're separated at the very least and taking time apart. Initially, Tommy has been against going after the wolves. He wanted to, but agreed with Maria that it was better to keep Jackson safe than to go blindly after the killers. Also, once in Seattle, Tommy and the others were willing to let Abby go. They'd taken out most of the killers, and with Dina's pregnancy, it was more important to get her home safe. However, Jesse's death and getting shot in the head caused Tommy's rage to light back up. In this scene, the roles are reversed. Tommy is trying to convince Ellie to go after Abby, whereas at the start of the game, Ellie was trying to convince Tommy to go after the killers. Maria was most definitely pissed at Tommy, even with his head wound when he got back from Seattle. Tommy probably could have saved this relationship if he had been willing to let go of Abby after Jesse's death, but Tommy let that rage engulf him again, just like Ellie had at the start of the game. In letting that urge for revenge take him over, Tommy destroyed what was left of his marriage. Tommy came to Ellie and Dina's home in order to tell Ellie about a really good lead he got on Abby's location. Ellie hears him out, but ultimately tells him no. That night, Ellie cannot sleep. She gets up, plays a little guitar, and thinks back on that day in Jackson. Here we finally see the events that took place the night Dina kissed Ellie. It's another really sweet and cute scene between the pair. The most important thing to happen that night, of course, is the fight. Ellie gets called a slur by the old fuck and Joel comes rushing in to defend Ellie. This really pisses Ellie off and she tells Joel off and the two head their separate ways. After reliving this moment and thinking about all the shit that's gone down and the issues that continue to go on, Ellie decides she can't take it and she needs to leave to finish the job. She tries to sneak out, but Dina comes down and tries her best to talk Ellie out of it. Dina tells Ellie that she can't keep doing this. She can't spend months wondering if Ellie is dead or alive. She needs Ellie to stay here, but she makes it clear that if Ellie goes, Dina's gone. And Ellie leaves to hunt down Abby. Skipping to Abby and Lev in California, they're out there following leads on the Fireflies and they even find them. They find one of their old safe houses thanks to a lead. Once the radio's back up and working, they manage to get into contact with the main Firefly base. They get the location and try to head that way, but are quickly grabbed by a group of slavers that roam the area. Now skip forward to when Ellie arrives in California. She's managed to track down where Abby and Lev were staying, but of course, they are not there. She finds a list of addresses and assumes the only one that's not crossed out is probably where they headed. So Ellie heads out. The California environments are really pretty. I lived in California for about 6 months, and while I lived in the Bay Area instead of Santa Barbara, the overall vibe is the same. I miss you, California. You're a fucked state in some ways, but goddamn, it was nice living there. After working through some encounters, Ellie walks right into a trap and gets badly hurt in the process. A few hours later, Ellie wakes up when the slavers arrive to see what they caught. One guy wants to just shoot Ellie and move on due to her injuries, but the other guy wants to at least use her for what they can get out of her. Nearby is a hanging clicker caught in another trap, and the slaver who wants to shoot Ellie gets a little spooked when it jumps back to life when he comes near. Ellie gets an idea. She taunts the man, calling him a pussy for being afraid of the clicker. This really gets at his ego, so he picks Ellie up and takes her near the clicker. Ellie doesn't care if she gets bit, so this really puts her at an advantage. She gets the clicker to grab the man instead of her and then uses the man's gun to waste the other guy's legs. The man freely offers up the location of his camp and tells Ellie about Abby in exchange for his freedom. But Ellie shoots him anyways. Just like at the end of part 1, you get a new gun for the last section of the game. The slavers use a silent submachine gun. It's a really good gun that I didn't use much my first time around, but on this playthrough I used it to the fullest. It can take out enemies fast and most importantly, quietly. One thing I like about this section are the slavers. It's another logical de-evolution of society during the outbreak. Catching other survivors and turning them into your slave labor just makes sense in this fucked world. Like the cannibals in part 1, it's a nasty part of this world that helps build out the world and the fucked up ways people had to survive. The final set of encounters you face while working your way through the slaver's base are really well done. A lot of the enemies have body armor and it makes killing them much harder. There are also chained up infected around the base and you can set them free and have them fight the slavers, but every time I tried this, I would just get caught by the clicker due to me forgetting about them. The base is also littered with slavers, so you have to really take care when moving through the area. It's a great way to end the game. Once you work your way through those final encounters, you reach the prisoners. Abby's not with them and is instead at a place called the Pillars. Abby and Lev tried to escape, and instead of just killing runaways, they place them on the pillars till they die. They stand on the tips of their toes until they die from exhaustion and exposure. Ellie is visibly shocked when she sees Abby. Abby's a raisin compared to her past self. These months she spent working on the slave farm and then her time on the pillars have wasted away her body. Lev is not any better off. Ellie initially has empathy for the pair. They both look very pathetic and weak. They have no weapons and both of their bodies are destroyed. Lev is barely conscious. If Ellie was filled with hate and rage, she could have just whipped out a gun and capped Abby right there, but she doesn't. She just sits and stares at the pathetic looking pair as Abby picks up Lev and carries him off towards the boat. Ellie follows of course, but again doesn't go right into fighting. Instead, she walks to the other nearby boat and sets her gear inside and starts to unwind the boat from its post. Like she's gonna leave. Ellie's really in a sort of shock during this whole moment until Joel's battered and beaten body flashes into her mind. It reminds Ellie why she's here and all the rage comes back. Abby refused to fight her and so Ellie threatens Lev to force the fight. Ellie is angry here for sure, but when she threatens Lev, it really doesn't seem filled with hate and malice. It sounds like Ellie's filled with desperation instead. The fight begins and it reminds me a lot of the final fight against Ganondorf in Skyward Sword. But more seriously, this fight is really intense. Like I've been saying the entire video, Naughty Dog nails tone and this fight is a great example of that. After some brutal brawling, Ellie gets on top of Abby and starts to drown her. In Abby's fighting moments, she bites off 2 of Ellie's fingers. Ellie is drowning Abby for a good while when another flash of Joel breaks into her mind and in turn, she lets go of Abby, tells her to get the fuck out of here, and then Ellie sits and sobs alone. Visually, this shot is perfect. The foggy shore gives a sense of emptiness, and so does the dull and dim color tone. It's a perfect visual representation of where Ellie ends the game at. Empty and alone, sitting in her own empty void. The final piece of criticism we'll address is the fact that Ellie doesn't get revenge at the end of the game. C tier. I can see why people would feel frustrated and unsatisfied by this, but you're missing the point, gamers. You're supposed to feel frustrated and dissatisfied because that is what Ellie is going through. She's been burning her life around her trying to find Abby. Her unending quest to find her drives a wedge in between her and her family. The initial hunt for the WLF members cost Jesse his life and Tommy his mobility and marriage. Ellie and Dina only lived due to Lev. And what was all this for? To kill people who killed Joel, right? Well, sure. I guess. But why? Ellie herself has big issues with Joel's actions, and it's not like she doesn't understand why the Fireflies would come after Joel. Again, the things Joel does at the end of part 1 are morally wrong. The debate around whether taking Ellie's life for a vaccine is ethical or not is something that I think has a little more meat to it, but in regards to Joel killing dozens of fireflies and the doctors, there's not an argument there. You can argue that the fireflies are unjustly killing Ellie, but she states before and after the incident that she would gladly die for the cure. So co-parter. The ending of part 1 consists of Joel forcing his choice on everyone by killing dozens and then lying to Ellie about it and gaslighting her for years. It's a powerful moment, but a morally wrong action. Ellie's words to Joel in part 2 make it clear that she struggles to see him the same way after those events. She would understand why the ex-Fireflies would want their revenge. All this isn't to say that Ellie would want Joel dead herself. It's just to say that Joel is complex. He does fucked up things for good reasons, and that's hard to grapple with. She does hate the Fireflies for what they did to Joel, but at this point, when Abby and Ellie are fighting in the ocean, so much more has happened. The entirety of Seattle went down, where Ellie kills most of the WLF members who helped find Joel. She also suffers big losses with the death of her friend Jesse and the almost death of Tommy. The thing that's driving Ellie at this point is not her hate for Abby. She most definitely hates Abby still, don't get me wrong, but the reason why she's out there is because of the PTSD she's experiencing around Joel's death. She hopes that with Abby dead, the nightmares will stop. Some of what drives her is anger, but it feels more like desperation. All this just to say that when Ellie is drowning Abby and has that flash of Joel in her mind, she realizes that killing Abby is going to fix nothing. It doesn't bring Ellie's dad back, it doesn't fix Tommy, it doesn't bring Jesse back into this world, and most importantly, it doesn't bring back Ellie's chance to fix her relationship with Joel. The final moments of the game are back at the farmhouse. Ellie's returned from California, and when she walks inside the house, it's empty. Almost everything is gone. Before, the home had a heart to it and it actually felt like a real place of safety. Now it's just an empty husk and it's really heartbreaking to see. Only Ellie's things are left in the home, including her guitar. She sits down and one last time plays the guitar. In case you didn't realize this before, it's obvious now that Ellie's missing fingers ruin her ability to play. She tries to play the song Joel first taught her again and is just unable to. It's a really heartbreaking moment. Ellie lost another connection she had with Joel. We get one final flashback. After the shithead calls Ellie a slur and Ellie and Joel fight, Ellie goes to Joel's house to talk. The pair has a real heart-to-heart with Joel trying to apologize for jumping in. Ellie's still really upset with Joel with what happened back in Utah, and she brings it up again. Ellie expresses her anger and frustration with Joel, and his response is that he would do it all over again. Ellie's last words to Joel that night are she cannot forgive him for what he did, but she wants to try. Not only did Ellie lose Joel on that fateful day, but she also lost all hope of fixing that relationship. Summing up The Last of Us Part 2 in a final thesis is almost impossible. After all, this video is long as fuck and we've talked about many different things. I think the tier list is a great final visual thesis. In my eyes, most of the criticism that comes toward The Last of Us Part 2 is based in either dishonesty or an honest misunderstanding of the media. Unfortunately though, a lot of the criticisms laid at the game are mainly based in bad faith dishonesty. Creators like the ones we talked about today really milked the game's hate for money. Doing so further helped blow all of this out of proportion and fed the hate train even more. The hate train really marred The Last of Us Part 2 for so many, and that's just heartbreaking because it really is an incredible experience. Boasting improved gameplay that's tense during stealth and non-stealth missions alike, incredibly stunning visuals as well as very detailed brutality, a deep attention to tone that takes your emotions on this melancholy roller coaster ride, and a detailed and layered story that's filled with complex characters. I highly encourage anyone who didn't love this game at launch to give it another go. Stories like this that explore deep moral concepts and perspectives are incredible, and this game is no different. My video on Attack on Titan is all about the moral grayness that surrounds those characters, and I saw a lot of that moral grayness in The Last of Us Part 2 characters. The obvious focus in this regard are the moral parallels between Ellie and Abby. I tried that line like 6 times. I've been recording for 6 hours and I can't say parallel. I just fucking said it. Oh my god. Neither Ellie or Abby could get past their trauma of losing their fathers, and in turn, both destroyed their lives in different ways. If Abby had just moved forward with her life and not hunted down Joel, then Ellie in turn would not have come to Seattle and killed her friends. In the same vein, if Ellie had been able to move forward past Joel's death instead of chasing Abby, Tommy would still be functional, Jesse would still be alive, and presumably Ellie and Dina would still be together in their farmhouse. Every detail of this story is slowly pieced together, and it paints this incredible picture of pain, loss, anger, sorrow, and even a little bit of hope. There is no simple way to sum up The Last of Us Part 2. I highly encourage you to re-examine the way you look at The Last of Us Part 2, because if you hated this game at launch, I promise you missed something. This video has almost killed me, so please subscribe. Thanks for watching, make sure to give your friends head, and have a great day.
Don't you worry, spit and come, you make my life okay.